G'day VanFam, I'm Brett from Sveto's Trippin', and in this video we're going to take a look at the question, should I bring a rooftop tinny touring around Australia? But first, why would you want to listen to me? For the last 2 years I've been touring around Australia with my family, and I've had a rooftop tinny along with me the whole way. But before we sold up to Travel Australia, I had a 5 metre Haynes Hunter half cab and a 4.3 metre tinny. So clearly I'm a little bit obsessed with fishing and being on the water. So I think that puts me in a pretty good position to be able to tackle this question. Pun intended. So the question is, should you bring a rooftop tinny with you if you're touring around Australia? Well, I think there are 5 important considerations that you should be looking into if you're asking yourself this question. They are cost, weight and storage, effort, stress and anxiety, and how often will you actually use it? So I think the best way to tackle this question is for me to take a look at each of these considerations. As far as rooftop tinny setups go, mine is definitely on the extreme end. I've got a casting platform, an electric motor, a 15 horsepower 2-stroke motor, I've got a good sounder, I've also got the boat loader and a fold-up trailer. My setup cost me about 15 grand, but I got really lucky and picked up an awesome second-hand deal. To get a setup like mine new, you'd probably be looking at around 20 to 30k, and that's before you've even taken into consideration some of the hidden costs. We'll go into those in more details in the next consideration. Look, it is possible to keep your costs a lot lower than that. If you're looking for a smaller tinny without any accessories and you're happy enough to manually load and unload the tinny, you could keep your costs pretty low, but a setup like that isn't going to be very capable. So let's split the difference for argument's sake and say the average rooftop tinny setup is going to cost around 10 to 15k. So you should ask yourself, how many cool fishing experiences could you have with that money that you were going to spend on a tinny? You could go and jump on a helicopter and fish some untouched gorges in Cape York. You could go out on a mothership off on the Great Barrier Reef and fish some untouched pristine reefs. You could go out on a hoverboat out and fish the runoff in Northern Territory and catch barramundi. I could go on with the cool fishing experiences you could have out there in Australia. But one important thing to note is you can't really do any of those with a rooftop tinny. The point that I'm obviously trying to make here is a rooftop tinny is a significant amount of money, and that's money that you could redirect towards fishing experiences. Adding a rooftop tinny into your setup means you're going to be adding an extra 100 to 300 kilos, and potentially even more, depending on the setup that you opt for. That means you're guaranteed to need a GVM upgrade included in your setup, which means your build is now going to be at least 5 grand more expensive. Not only that, but the tinny's going to need something to go on. That could be as simple as a cheap frame, but it could be as expensive as a quality canopy build that's set up to handle that weight. So you're going to be spending some more money here. These are the hidden costs that I was talking about that you may not have considered in the cost of setting up a rooftop tinny. Now that you've installed your tinny on the roof, you've got to keep in mind that you've made your vehicle significantly heavier. I've now been travelling Australia for 2 years, and I can tell you there's been plenty of times where I've had to opt out of going and exploring some beaches and doing some 4-wheel driving because I know my car is too heavy and it's going to cause me a lot of problems trying to get in and do these tracks. Now, one last thing to consider in weights and storage is that a tinny is not just a tinny. You've got a whole load of peripherals that go with it. You've got fuel, you've got motors, you've got life jackets, you've got fishing equipment. And trust me, living in a caravan, you don't have a lot of space. So you need to be keeping in mind that you're going to have to find somewhere for all of this stuff to live. A rooftop tinny is not like the boat that you keep at home, where if you want to take it out, you simply hitch it on, take it down to the water, go for a fish, bring it home, rinse it off and put it away. A rooftop tinny is a lot more effort than that, and I'd be willing to make a bet that anybody watching this video who has had a boat or currently has a boat would be able to tell you that there have been times when taking their tinny out just seemed like too much effort. I'm not ashamed to admit that I certainly have. To get the rooftop tinny, you've got to take it down from the roof. That's a 15-minute job. You've got to put the trailer together. There's another 15-minute job. You've got to pull all the peripherals out, the fuel and your fishing equipment. There's another 15-minute to 30-minute job. And then when you're done, you've got to do it all again in reverse. What I'm trying to say here is it takes quite a lot of effort to get the rooftop tinny set up and ready to go. And if you're only staying somewhere for a couple of days, you're certainly going to be asking yourself the question, is it worth the effort? Having a rooftop tinny certainly causes a few stresses and anxiety. Having travelled with one now for 2 years, here's a few of the things that have caused me a few issues. I didn't have a massive budget with my setup, so I've got quite a cheap canopy setup. Now my canopy setup is starting to struggle with the weight of the rooftop tinny. The additional weight on the roof has put a lot of stress on my cheaper canopy. At one point, the welds in the canopy frame gave, along with the gussets that I had previously installed to try and strengthen the whole setup up in the first place. So I've had to brace the canopy again, and fingers crossed that this holds. It's feeling pretty solid for now, but I've got the gib planned in the future, so only time will tell. I've got a dual battery system in our car. It powers the car fridge and our charging station, and that system also comes with a couple of solar panels. But guess what goes over the top of the solar panels? That's right, the boat. So I've also got a solar blanket that I have to manage in order to keep the batteries topped up in the car when we're not taking the boat off. Having a rooftop tinny means you're not going to be able to go through drive-through, and you're not going to be able to go into underground parking. And trust me, it can be so frustrating trying to find a park. Often, a lot of the outside car parks at supermarkets will have some of those low clearance things, even though most of the parking is outside. This drives me nuts. Lastly, when you take the car in to get a service, you're going to have to take the tinny off the roof because it can't go on the hoist with it on. You should really have a think about how often you're actually going to get to use the tinny. I would say I get to use my tinny at about 5 to 10% of the camps that I go to. Now, Owen and I are the only keen fishers in our family. That means we have to choose our camps to keep the whole family happy. So we often don't put ourselves in miserable situations with mozzies and sandflies that are hard to get into, because my wife would get quite upset at me if I did that too often. If your whole family is keen to go fishing and you're willing to go miles out of the way and brave those conditions, then you might get to use yours a bit more than I do. But despite having to keep my wife and daughter happy, I can tell you that there are some camps that we go to that I would be absolutely kicking myself if I didn't have the tinny, and those are the times that I'm so happy that we do have one. And then there's the northern end of Australia where the crocodiles roam. Now, I'm someone that loves being on the water, in the water and near the water, and it is so upsetting that you have to be scared of the water up there. So you need to ask yourself the question, are you going to be willing to take the risk of launching your tinny in croc-infested waters where these apex predators can and do take people every year? Because if you're not willing to do that, then there goes half of the places that you camp where you're going to use your tinny. So, there you go. I've probably done a really good job of scaring you guys off wanting to take a tinny around Australia. I'm sorry that I've been sounding so negative, so let's quickly run over some of the positives about having a tinny while you're travelling around Australia. I love having our tinny. It allows us to get out there and explore and see places where most of the tourists don't get to. It lets me get out and catch a feed in places where people without a tinny have no chance of catching a fish. And some of my absolute favourite memories from travelling around Australia would come from the times when we've been out exploring in our tinny. But I didn't want to just come on here and share only the positives of taking a tinny around Australia. If you're asking yourself this question, you're probably well aware of what the positives would be. What you really needed to know is why you shouldn't take a tinny around Australia. If I were to ask myself the question, should I take a tinny around Australia, knowing what I know now, here are my answers. If I were starting over again and planning to travel Australia for multiple years, yes, I would take a tinny with me again. For me, the stress, effort and cost are worth it. But if I were someone that was planning to do a 1-year big lap, I wouldn't take a tinny with me. I don't think that it would be worth the effort. I would instead set some money aside and plan to do a few fishing charters while I was on my lap. As always, thanks so much for watching. I really hope you got something out of this video. If you did, it'd be great if you could hit that like button. We also put out a weekly vlog, so maybe you'd like to go back and have a look at some of those. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye!